Hello, I'm Andy Lazor. I'm a water quality specialist with University of Maryland Extension, and welcome to this Wednesday water webinar on how a septic system works. So we'll begin with just talking about some basic principles or factors of on-site wastewater treatment or septic systems. Really important factor is that wastewater treatment basically depends on natural, chemical, and biological processes. This occurs in the tank and as well as the drain field and the surrounding soil. And that biological activity, a lot of beneficial bacteria and other organisms help to break down the organics and the nutrients, and then there's chemical reactions, and then the bacteria also can actually outcompete pathogenic bacteria, or the pathogenic bacteria get trapped in the soil particles and die off. In a conventional system, which is just a septic tank and a drain field, the vast majority of treatment occurs in the soil in the drain field area. The exception to that is if you have an aerobic treatment unit, or what we call in Maryland best available technology, or BAT. Those units, which replace the septic tank component of a system, are very high in nitrogen and organic reduction. And a drain field requires natural or undisturbed soil to take advantage of the natural texture and structure of the soil in order to maximize water infiltration or percolation into the soil. And another really important characteristic is that every system is unique. It is specifically designed for your home site, the size of your home, and also the local site conditions. What is your soil quality like, for example? And particularly the texture and structure is very, very important, as well as the depth of the soil, or the distance from the bottom of a drain field to some limiting layer, whether that be a clay or a rock type of geology or the water table. A conventional system is a straightforward device that works off of physics, gravity. Waste water comes in from the home into the septic tank and then goes out into typically a distribution box, which helps to distribute the wastewater evenly to the number of trenches that you have. And here's a gravel trench that has a perforated pipe that's surrounded by gravel. And that gravel allows the wastewater to easily move through and cover the width, the entire width of the soil drain field trench. And there, the wastewater will infiltrate into the soil. And as I said, this is where we're getting the bulk of treatment. It's also important to note that any wastewater treatment system, whether it be a treatment plant or a septic system, is not 100%. So there are some nutrients and also even some contaminants that will eventually reach groundwater. And that's why it's so important that we have a well-operating system, we maintain it well to maximize the filtration so that we can minimize the impact of our groundwater. Here's a close-up of a septic tank. Waste come in, and then it goes through this PVC baffle, and the solids will settle because they're heavier, and then the fats, oils, and grease, also called scum, will float. And this is a two-chambered concrete tank, and so it has this dividing wall here to keep the solids and the scum in on this first settling chamber. And then the clarified water will then go to the next chamber. You might get a little bit more settling or floating the scum before it then goes out in the drain field. So a septic tank provides both storage volume and settling. And then this tank also has risers. And these are access risers for maintenance of the tank, pumping the tank, checking filter, checking the structure, the integrity of the tank. And typically they have lids that are at the grass or ground surface. Soil is very bioactive. 1 teaspoon can contain 1 million to 1 billion bacterial cells. And these are beneficial bacteria that help, again, feed on the organic matter, break down that wastewater, etc. And then the type of soil that you have will dictate a couple of things. One, the percolation rate, as this diagram shows. If you have a clay soil, which is here on the left, it's very tightly packed. Water has a very difficult time to infiltrate through. If you have more of a sandy silt loam, or if you even get into more of a sandy type of loam, you can see that both water and air can get down through the soil, and that's important to maximize wastewater treatment. In Maryland, we require 4 feet of soil depth or vertical separation from the bottom of the drain field to some restrictive layer. And oftentimes that could be the water table or some very impenetrable layer of geology, clay, whatever the case may be. There are exceptions to that 4 feet. And in the case where you don't have 4 feet of depth, oftentimes you may have to build up your drain field in, for example, as in the sand mound. We'll describe that later. So this is a graphic about the bio and chemical processes that go on in a septic system and treatment. Wastewater comes into the septic tank. Most of the nitrogen is in the ammonia form, and then it goes out into the drain field. And this is real important. The drain field needs to breathe, if you will. It needs to have oxygen to provide those beneficial bacteria to break down the organics and break down that ammonia here, and then it is broken down to nitrate. And then deeper in the soil and in areas where there is no oxygen, another species of bacteria breaks down that nitrate and converts it to nitrogen gas, which can ultimately be vented off back into the atmosphere. And our atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen. So it's a kind of a natural nitrogen cycle here. Again, taking advantage of beneficial bacteria and other organisms to help break down the wastewater. It's important to note that a septic tank, though, really is most of its purpose, as I said, is for storage and settling. It only removes about 6% of the nitrogen. And we have our drain fields. Discussed already the conventional gravel trench. This will be covered up with a little bit more gravel and then soil. And then we have chambers, and this is basically 3-foot diameter pipe that's cut in half, so it's a U shape, and it basically replaces the gravel. Wastewater is, gravity fed into the chamber, and it evenly spreads out the wastewater over the soil in that trench. And that's the purpose of trenches, is to maximize wastewater contact with soil so that it can infiltrate and be treated. Here we have what's called drip dispersal, and this is a specialized drip tube that is placed in the upper 6 to 12 inches of the soil, which is very bioactive region of the soil, and wastewater is periodically pumped out, comes out of the drip dispersal pipe. And then here we have a sand mound, which again is built up above grade because there wasn't adequate soil or you have a high water table. So looking at a mound system, you can see kind of this graphic here shows what that would look like. There's specialized sand that is put in there. Then there's gravel with the piping, distribution piping. It's covered up with topsoil, and typically it's seeded with some sort of vegetation. But wastewater will come from the house, typically goes into an advanced treatment unit, which I'll describe in a minute. It has to go to a pump tank because, again, this is above grade. And so it has to be pumped up into the sand mound. And here's a little bit more. But again, the purpose is to spread it out over that soil, and by going up, we now have that 4 feet of soil requirement that's needed in order to adequately treat the wastewater. And here's a drip dispersal system, just kind of showing the layout of that drip irrigation tubing. Again, it's very shallow, the 12 inches. And, in contrast with typical gravel trenches, could be 3 to even 8 feet deep, just depends upon the soil type. Then we have advanced treatment systems, or in Maryland, best available technology, or BATs. And these are basically a miniaturized wastewater treatment plant, and it replaces the septic tank portion of a system. And it has multiple chambers. This first chamber, wastewater comes in. And the first chamber is the settling chamber, much like a septic tank, but much smaller too. And then that clarified water then goes to the next chamber, which is where we provide aeration. And it's this aeration that's providing the bacteria the oxygen it needs in order to break down the organic matter, provides that oxygen for the chemical processes to happen And then from there, it goes into another settling chamber, again, to remove some of the additional solids. And from there, it can actually, depend upon the manufacturer, it may be recycled back through the system and to get additional treatment, or it can then be pumped up or even gravity fed to the drain field. And one of the important things to note here is looking at this effluent. It's clear and essentially odorless. If you were to compare that with septic tank effluent, it would be dark black or brown, and definitely would have an odor. So these BAT units can remove 55 to 78% of nitrogen, as I said, compared to only about 6% for a traditional conventional septic tank. That's how a system works, but knowing how some of the system works, it's important to follow through with maintenance tips to maximize performance of the system. And one of those is to conserve water by fixing leaks, for example. A running toilet adds a lot of water to a system, and your system is designed to handle a certain amount of water per day. And if you overload it, then it could actually cause wastewater surfacing up on the top of the ground, or even slow the drainage of your fixtures, your toilets. Worst case scenario would be a backup of wastewater into the home. Garbage disposals do not mix well with septic tank. The challenge is that they grind up organics, food particles, and they may not settle out. And potentially they could be adding to the organic load going out in the drain field. And you want to minimize that organic material going out in the drain field. It can clog up the soil pores. Also, don't want to dispose of any chemicals down the drains, paints, say an unwanted bottle of cleaner, your frying oil, for example. All of that material is not broken down in the septic system, and then could actually be getting out in the drain field and impacting the soil to where it no longer allows that infiltration or percolation. Another key point is only flush toilet paper, no wipes. They may be marketed as flushable or septic tank friendly, but they're not. They can clog up the baffles, they can clog up pumps, filters, and they just do not break down within the short time. Again, your septic system is typically designed, depending upon the size, to handle about 2.5, 3 days of wastewater. So again, they do not break down in that time. If you have any stormwater from your roof, your gutters, or your neighbor's property, be sure that it runs away from the tank and the drain field, because you don't want to add additional water to the system, because again, it can hydraulically overload it. Compacting the soil by driving on it or building a structure over it, not a good idea, because again, you will compact that soil and reduce its ability to accept wastewater. And certain trees, particularly with a gravel trench, causes problems because the trees love water and nutrients. And that's what a septic system has plenty of. And those roots can actually enter into the pipe and clog it. And then you would have a backup into your home. Another very important maintenance practice is to pump your tank, remove those fats, oils, and grease and solids every 3 to 5 years. The smaller the tank and the more people you have in the home, the greater the frequency of pumping. And then if you have a filter, be sure that that's cleaned once or twice a year, again, depending upon the size tank and the usage of the system. Just showing you a little bit more detail on the frequency. Again, if you have more people and a smaller tank, you may have to pump more frequently. So that is a quick overview of how a system works and key maintenance practices. I encourage you to take advantage of the wealth of information that's out there through your local county environmental health department, your state Department of Environment, and EPA. Thank you.